The night Elena Cruz was dragged into an underground poker room, her father didn't just lose money, he bet her freedom on a rigged hand. Across the table sat Adrian Volkov, the man who controlled half the city without ever raising his voice. One game, one decision, one woman who refused to be anyone's prize. This is the story of how a daughter became deadlier than the empire that tried to claim her. If you want to see how far Elena's fight takes her, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The poker room smelled like expensive cigars and bad choices. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into by accident. 3 floors beneath the Diamond Crown Casino, past 2 sets of steel doors and a security checkpoint manned by men who looked like they ate problems for breakfast, the room existed in a pocket of the city where laws didn't reach and mercy didn't live. Elena Cruz knew all of this before she was shoved through the door. She'd been dragged from her apartment at midnight. No explanation, no warning, just 2 men in suits who didn't bother with pleasantries. They'd zip-tied her wrists, thrown a jacket over her shoulders to hide the restraints, and walked her through the casino floor like she was just another drunk being escorted out. No one looked twice. No one ever did in places like this. Now she stood at the edge of a room that reeked of power and desperation, her heart slamming against her ribs as she took in the scene. The table was massive, polished mahogany that probably cost more than her yearly rent. Green felt stretched across its surface, marked with chips stacked in neat towers of red, black, and gold. 5 men sat around it, but Elena's eyes locked on only one, her father. Victor Cruz sat hunched in his chair like a man already beaten, his shirt collar dark with sweat, his hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. He didn't look at her, wouldn't meet her eyes. That told her everything she needed to know. "Jesus Christ, Dad," she breathed, but her voice didn't carry over the low murmur of conversation. One of the men holding her arm gave her a rough shove forward. "Move!" She stumbled, catching herself against the back of an empty chair. The conversation died instantly. Every head turned toward her. "Ah," said a voice from the far end of the table. "Our final piece has arrived." The man who spoke didn't raise his voice, but the words cut through the room like a blade. Elena's gaze snapped to him, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. Adrian Volkov. She'd never seen him in person before, but she knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. You didn't run an empire like his without becoming a ghost story parents told their kids. Behave, or Volkov's men will come for you in the night. He looked younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s maybe, with sharp features and dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a banker or a college professor if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore a black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been painted on, and when he tilted his head to study her, Elena felt like she was being dissected. "Miss Cruz," he said, and the way he pronounced her name made it sound like he already knew everything about her. "Please, sit. I'm not sitting anywhere until someone tells me what the hell is going on." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Small victory. Adrian's expression didn't change. "Your father didn't explain?" "My father hasn't said a goddamn word to me in 3 months." That got a reaction. Victor flinched like she'd slapped him, his shoulders curling further inward. One of the other men at the table, a thick-necked guy with gold rings on every finger, let out a low whistle. "Feisty," Gold Ring said, grinning. "I like her already." Adrian silenced him with a glance. Then he looked back at Elena, and this time there was something almost like curiosity in his expression. "Your father," he said carefully, "owes a significant amount of money to several people in this room. Tonight was supposed to settle those debts." Elena's stomach dropped. "How much?" $240,000. The number hit her like a freight train. She staggered back a step, her vision blurring at the edges. That's not possible. He doesn't," Adrian agreed, which is why he offered alternative collateral. The room tilted. Elena's eyes snapped back to her father, and this time he did look at her. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and there was something in his expression that made her want to scream. Shame, desperation, and underneath it all, resignation. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. "What did you do?" Victor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, it was Adrian who answered. "He put you on the table, Miss Cruz." The words didn't make sense at first, They bounced around inside her skull like loose change, refusing to settle into anything coherent. Then, slowly, horrifically, the meaning clicked into place. "No," she whispered. "3 hands," Adrian continued, his tone as neutral as if he were discussing the weather. "Winner takes the pot, and ownership of the debt tied to your name." "My name?" Elena's voice spiked. "What debt? I don't—" "Credit cards, loans, a mortgage on a property you've never seen, all opened in your name over the past 18 months. Ice flooded her veins. She spun toward her father. "You used my identity?" Victor's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to clasp them together. "I was going to pay it back. I swear, Elena, I was going to—" "You put me in debt for $250,000 so you could gamble it away?" Her voice cracked like a whip, and Victor flinched again, but he didn't defend himself, didn't even try. He just sat there, small and pathetic. And Elena realized with stunning clarity that this wasn't the first time. This was just the first time he'd run out of ways to fix it. "Sit down, Miss Cruz." Adrian's voice cut through her rage like a bucket of cold water. She turned back to him, breathing hard, and found him watching her with that same unreadable expression. "I said sit. It wasn't a request." Elena's legs moved before her brain caught up. She dropped into the chair directly across from her father, her hands curling into fists on the table. One of the men behind her cut the zip ties, and she rubbed her wrists, feeling the blood rush back into her fingers. "This is insane," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "You can't just— People aren't collateral. This isn't legal." "You're right," Adrian said. "It isn't." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "But legality is a question of enforcement, Miss Cruz. And no one in this room is interested in involving the authorities." Gold Rings chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Elena's gaze darted around the table, taking in the other players for the first time. There were 4 of them, not counting Adrian. Gold Rings sat to her father's left, still grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd had all week. Next to him was a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses who looked like an accountant but carried himself like a snake. Across from them sat a woman in her 50s with platinum hair and an expression that could cut glass. And at the far end, Elena's breath caught. The man at the end of the table was younger than the others, maybe late 20s, with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed money. But it was the way he looked at Adrian that made her skin crawl. There was something wrong in that gaze, something hungry. "Marco DeLuca," Adrian said, following her line of sight. "My associate." The way he said associate made it sound like a threat. Marco smiled at her. It didn't reach his eyes. "Pleasure." Elena didn't respond. She turned back to Adrian, her mind racing. "So what happens now?" "Now?" Adrian picked up the deck of cards in front of him, his movements precise and controlled. "Now we finish the game. And if you win, then the debt transfers to me, along with the responsibility of deciding what to do with you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. "And if someone else wins?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way Gold Rings was looking at her said everything. "This is medieval," she said, her voice shaking. "You're talking about me like I'm a piece of property." "I'm talking about you," Adrian said quietly, "like you're a complication in a business transaction, which is what you are." The bluntness of it stole her breath. "Your father made a choice," Adrian continued, shuffling the deck with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. "A stupid choice, but his nonetheless. Now the rest of us are left to clean up the mess. So yes, Miss Cruz, you are collateral, and in about 5 minutes, someone at this table is going to own the legal right to collect on every dollar attached to your name." Elena's hands clenched so hard her nails bit into her palms. "I could leave. Right now. Walk out that door and never look back." "You could try." The 2 men who'd dragged her here shifted behind her chair. Elena didn't need to turn around to know they'd stop her before she made it 3 steps. She was trapped. Adrian began dealing the cards. Elena watched his hands move, smooth, efficient, every motion controlled. The cards slid across the felt in perfect arcs, landing face down in front of each player. 2 cards each. Texas Hold'em. She recognized the game instantly. Her father had taught her to play when she was 8 years old. The irony was so bitter she almost laughed. "Ante up," Adrian said. Chips clattered as the players pushed their bets into the center. Victor's stack was pathetically small, maybe 10,000 in chips, if that. Everyone else had mountains. The first 3 community cards hit the table. King of spades, 7 of hearts, 2 of diamonds, gold rings bet big. The accountant folded, platinum hair raised. Marco called. Victor hesitated, then pushed in half his remaining chips, his hand shaking so badly he almost knocked over his stack. Adrian called without blinking. The turn card came down. 9 of clubs. More betting, more posturing. Elena watched it unfold with a sinking feeling in her gut. Her father was drowning, and everyone at the table knew it. They were circling like sharks waiting for the kill. The river card dropped. Ace of spades. Victor went all in. It was a desperate move, the kind of play you made when you had nothing left to lose. Gold rings folded with a disgusted grunt. Platinum hair followed. Marco stared at the cards for a long moment, then slid his chips forward. Call. Adrian studied his hand. Then, almost lazily, he pushed his entire stack into the center. Raise. The room went silent. Marco's jaw tightened. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. His gaze flicked to Adrian, then to the pot, then back again. "You don't have the cards," Marco said finally. "Don't I?" The 2 men stared at each other across the table, and Elena felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. This wasn't just about the game anymore. This was something else, something older. Marco's hand hovered over his chips. Then he folded. "Smart," Adrian murmured. He turned his attention to Victor, who looked like he was about to pass out. "Show your cards, Mr. Cruz." Victor flipped them over with trembling hands. Pair of 7s. With the 7 on the board, he had 3 of a kind. It was a decent hand, not great, but decent. Adrian turned his cards face up without ceremony. Ace of hearts, ace of clubs. 3 aces. Victor's face went ashen. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." "The pot is mine," Adrian said, his voice cutting through Victor's panic like a scalpel. "Which means the debt is mine, which means—" "Wait!" Every head turned toward Elena. She was on her feet before she'd fully registered the decision, her chair scraping back with a harsh screech. Her heart was trying to punch through her ribcage, but her voice came out clear. "That game was rigged!" The silence that followed was suffocating. Gold rings let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, this is rich." "Sit down, girl," Platinum Hair said coldly. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Elena didn't sit. She kept her eyes locked on Adrian, watching for any flicker of reaction. "The deck was marked," she said. "Not obviously, but the cut was too clean, the distribution too perfect. And Marco—" She turned to look at the younger man, whose expression had gone very still. "You folded a winning hand." Marco's smile was gone now. "Careful, Miss Cruz. You had pocket kings," Elena continued, her pulse roaring in her ears. "With the king on the board, you had 3 of a kind, better than my father's hand. You should have won." "She's bluffing," Marco said, but his voice was tight. "Am I?" Elena took a step closer to the table. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw the game, which means someone wanted Adrian to win, which means this whole thing—" She gestured at the room, the cards, the chips, was a setup from the start. The temperature in the room plummeted. Adrian hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but something in his expression had changed, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "Explain," he said quietly. Elena's mouth went dry. She'd just accused a Mafia boss of being conned in his own game. If she was wrong, if she'd misread the situation, she was dead. But she'd grown up watching her father play cards in back rooms and basements, learning to spot a cheat from 20 feet away. And she knew what she'd seen. "The shuffle was clean," she said, forcing herself to meet Adrian's gaze. "But the deal wasn't. You gave yourself the aces, and Marco knew it. That's why he folded. He was supposed to lose to you, not win the pot himself." "That's bullshit," Marco snapped, but there was an edge of panic in his voice now. Adrian raised one hand and Marco fell silent instantly. "Go on," Adrian said to Elena. She swallowed hard. "Someone in this room wanted you to win my father's debt, which means someone wanted you tied to me. I don't know why yet, but I will." The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Then Adrian did something Elena didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator wore when it finally spotted the trap. "Marco," he said softly, still looking at Elena, "show me your cards." "I folded," Marco said quickly. "They're already in the muck." "Then we'll retrieve them." "Adrian, this is ridiculous. Now!" The word cracked like a gunshot. One of the security guards moved to the discard pile and carefully separated out the last 2 cards folded. He placed them face up on the table. King of Hearts, King of Diamonds, Pocket Kings. Elena had been right. The room erupted. Goldring surged to his feet, swearing. Platinum Hair's expression could have frozen lava. And Marco? Marco looked like a cornered animal, his hand sliding toward his jacket. "Don't," Adrian said, and the single word stopped Marco cold. Adrian rose slowly from his chair, and despite the chaos around them, the room fell silent again. He walked around the table with measured steps, his gaze never leaving Marco. "How long?" Adrian asked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "How? Long?" Marco's jaw worked. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged. 6 months. Who else? Does it matter? Adrian moved so fast, Elena almost missed it. 1 second he was standing 3 feet away. The next he had Marco by the throat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. "Who else?" Marco gasped for air, his face turning red. "Castellano," he choked out. "He's been moving product without your cut." Adrian released him, and Marco crumpled to the floor, coughing. The name Castellano seemed to mean something to the others. Gold rings went pale. Platinum Hair stood abruptly, her chair clattering backward. "If Castellano's involved," she said tightly, "then we're all exposed." "Not all of us," Adrian said. His voice was eerily calm now, the rage locked down behind iron control. "Some of us didn't betray our partners." He turned to Elena, and she fought the urge to step back. "You just dismantled a conspiracy 6 months in the making," he said. "In under 3 minutes, using nothing but observation." Elena's throat was too dry to respond. Adrian studied her for a long moment, something calculating moving behind his eyes. Then he looked at the security guards. "Take Marco downstairs. I'll deal with him later." The guards moved instantly, hauling Marco to his feet. He didn't resist, but the look he shot Elena as they dragged him past could have stripped paint. "You just signed your death warrant," he hissed. Then he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. Elena stood frozen in the center of the room, her entire body trembling with adrenaline. Around her, the remaining players were gathering their chips, their expressions ranging from shock to grudging respect to barely concealed fury. Adrian walked back to the table and collected the deck of cards. He held them up to the light, examining them with the kind of focus most people reserved for bomb disposal. "Marked," he confirmed quietly. "Subtle, but there." He set the deck down and looked at Victor, who had gone from ashen to green. "Your daughter just saved your life, Mr. Cruz. If this game had stood, Castellano would have had leverage over both of us. You should thank her." Victor didn't say anything. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Adrian's gaze shifted back to Elena. "You have a choice to make, Miss Cruz." "What kind of choice?" "The debt exists. The fraud happened. Even with the game exposed, you're still on the hook for $240,000 in loans, credit cards, and a mortgage tied to a house you've never seen." He paused. "I can erase all of it. Every dollar. Every mark on your credit. Every piece of paper with your name on it." Elena's breath caught. "Why would you do that?" "Because you just exposed a traitor in my organization. That's worth something." "What's the catch?" Adrian smiled again. That same cold, calculated expression. "The catch is that you work for me. 30 days. You help me find every crack in my operation, every leak, every person who thought they could steal from me. And when it's done, you walk away clean. And if I say no, then you leave tonight, and by tomorrow morning, every creditor in the city will be knocking on your door. You'll spend the next decade buried in debt you didn't earn, trying to prove fraud that no court will care about. Your father will disappear, probably into a shallow grave, and you'll be lucky to survive the month." The brutal honesty of it hit her like a slap. Elena looked at her father, slumped in his chair like a broken doll. Then she looked back at Adrian, standing tall and composed, offering her a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. 30 days, she said slowly. 30 days. And then I'm free. Completely free. You have my word. Elena almost laughed. The word of a mafia boss. That's what her life had come to. But looking around the room, at the guns on the guard's hips, at her father's hollow eyes, at the locked door and the 3 floors of casino above them, she realized she didn't actually have a choice. She never had. Fine, she said. 30 days. But I want it in writing. Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. You don't trust me? Would you? He considered that for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. He scrawled something on the back of one of the discarded playing cards, the ace of spades, and slid it across the table to her. Elena picked it up. The handwriting was sharp, precise. 30 days. Full debt erasure upon completion. No obligations beyond the agreed term. AV. It wasn't legally binding. It wasn't notarized or witnessed or worth anything in a court of law. But as she stared at those 3 initials, Elena realized it was the closest thing to a guarantee she was going to get. She pocketed the card. When do we start? She asked. Adrian checked his watch. 6 hours ago. Get some sleep, Miss Cruz. Tomorrow we begin tearing my empire apart to see what crawls out. He gestured to one of the guards who stepped forward. Marcus will take you to a secure location. You'll stay there for the duration of our arrangement. I'm not staying in some safe house. You are, Adrian interrupted. If you want to live through the week, Castellano knows you exposed his operation. Marco knows you cost him his position. Do you really think they're going to let you walk around unprotected? The logic was sound, even if Elena hated it. She turned to her father one last time. He was staring at his empty hands, looking smaller and older than she'd ever seen him. Dad, she said quietly. He looked up, and this desperation in his eyes almost broke her. I'm sorry, he whispered. Elena, I'm so sorry. Save it. The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. She couldn't. Not when he'd used her identity, gambled away her future, and offered her up like a poker chip. I'll deal with you later, she said. Right now I have 30 days to survive, and when this is over, when I'm free, you stay out of my life. Forever. Understood? Victor's face crumpled, but he nodded. Elena turned and walked toward the door, following Marcus out into the hallway. Behind her, she heard Adrian's voice, low and lethal, addressing the remaining players. If anyone in this room is working with Castellano, I suggest you disappear before sunrise, because when I find you, and I will find you, what happened to Marco will look like mercy. Then the door closed, and Elena was moving through the corridor, her legs shaking with delayed shock. She just made a deal with the devil. And somewhere in the city above them, people who wanted her dead were already making plans. But as she climbed into the back seat of Marcus's car and watched the casino lights fade into the distance, Elena Cruz made herself a promise. She'd survive the next 30 days. She'd expose every rat in Adrian Volkov's empire. And then she'd walk away free. Not because someone won her, not because someone owned her, but because she'd earned it. No one was going to bet on her life again. Not her father, not Adrian Volkov, not anyone. The car pulled onto the highway, and the city spread out before her like a glittering cage. Elena pressed her hand against the window and felt the glass cold beneath her palm. 30 days. She could do 30 days. She had to. The safe house wasn't what Elena expected. She'd pictured something out of a crime movie, boarded windows, peeling paint, maybe a mattress on the floor, and a single light bulb swinging from the ceiling. Instead, Marcus pulled up to a sleek high-rise in the financial district, the kind of building where doormen wore white gloves and the lobby had marble floors that could double as mirrors. You're kidding, she said. Marcus killed the engine. Mr. Volkov doesn't do things halfway. He led her through a side entrance, bypassing the main lobby entirely, and took her up a private elevator that required a keycard to operate. They rode in silence to the 23rd floor, and when the doors opened, Elena stepped into a penthouse that probably cost more per month than she'd earned in the last year. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, modern furniture in shades of gray and white, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a spaceship, and in the corner, a telescope pointed at the skyline like someone actually spent time stargazing from a building surrounded by light pollution. There's food in the fridge, Marcus said, handing her the key card. Clothes in the bedroom closet, your size. Don't leave without calling first. Someone will be watching the building at all times. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. There's a difference. Marcus left before she could argue, and Elena found herself alone in a space that felt more like a museum than a home. She walked to the windows and pressed her forehead against the glass, staring down at the streets below. From up here, the city looked almost peaceful. You couldn't see the blood in the gutters or the desperation in the back alleys. Just lights and movement and the illusion of order. Her phone buzzed. Elena pulled it out, half expecting another threat from Marco or one of his people. Instead, it was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Sleep. 6 a.m. pickup. Wear something you can move in. Ah. She stared at the message, then deleted it and turned off her phone. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion won out around 4 in the morning. She collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into a dreamless black that swallowed her whole. When the alarm went off 2 hours later, it felt like she'd barely closed her eyes. The clothes Marcus had mentioned were exactly her size. Black jeans, a fitted jacket, boots that actually fit. She showered fast, braided her hair back, and was waiting in the lobby when a black SUV pulled up at exactly 6. The driver didn't speak, just opened the door and waited for her to get in. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a warehouse on the east side of the river. The kind of neighborhood where you didn't ask questions and you definitely didn't call the cops. The building looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. But when Elena stepped through the door, she found herself in a space that had been completely gutted and renovated. Computer stations lined one wall. Filing cabinets covered another. A conference table dominated the center of the room, covered in spreadsheets, ledgers, and what looked like surveillance photos. And standing at the head of the table, studying a laptop screen with the kind of focus most people reserved for surgery, was Adrian Volkov. He looked up when she entered. You're early. You said 6. I said 6 a.m. pickup. Most people interpret that as arriving at 6:30. I'm not most people. Adrian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. No, you're not. He closed the laptop and gestured to the table. We have a problem. Just one? Several, but let's start with the immediate crisis. He tapped one of the surveillance photos. Do you know what this is? Elena leaned closer. The photo showed a shipping container being loaded onto a truck, time-stamped from 3 nights ago. Nothing remarkable about it except for the logo on the side, a lotus flower inside a circle. No, she admitted. That's one of my containers. It was supposed to contain medical supplies being shipped to a clinic in the South District. Instead, it contained 40 kilos of uncut heroin. Elena's stomach dropped. Jesus. The shipment was intercepted by customs. My people inside managed to bury the report before it went up the chain, but that won't last. Someone is using my logistics network to move product without authorization, and when it gets traced back to me, I'll be the one facing federal charges. So stop the shipments. I can't stop what I can't see. Adrian pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop and turned it toward her. This is a record of every container that's moved through my network in the last 6 months. 15,000 shipments, most of them legitimate. But somewhere in that data, there's a pattern, a signature, something that tells me which ones are dirty. Elena stared at the columns of numbers. You want me to find it? I want you to find the people behind it. The pattern is just the starting point. I'm not an analyst, She stopped, realizing she didn't actually know what she was anymore. A victim? A conspirator? A weapon? You're someone who can spot a rigged game, Adrian said quietly. That's exactly what this is. Someone is playing me, using my own infrastructure against me, and you're going to help me figure out who. He pulled out a chair. Sit. We have a lot of work to do. The next 6 hours were brutal. Adrian walked her through the structure of his operation. Legitimate businesses layered over less legitimate ones. Money flowing through a dozen shell companies. Shipments moving through ports and warehouses and distribution centers scattered across the city. It was a machine, precise and efficient, and someone had slipped a virus into the code. Here, Elena said around noon, tapping a line in the spreadsheet. This one doesn't match. Adrian leaned over her shoulder. Explain. The weight's off. It's listed as medical supplies, but the container weight is 40% heavier than it should be. And look, She scrolled down. Same thing here and here. They're all going to the same distribution center. Castellano's warehouse. The name hung between them like a blade. Adrian straightened, his expression going cold. How many? Elena counted. 17 in the last 3 months. And I never saw it because the paperwork was clean. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I need eyes on the Northside warehouse. Now. I want to know who's been accessing it and when. He hung up and looked at Elena. You just found me 17 federal offenses. You're welcome? This time he did smile. It was brief, almost invisible, but it was there. Come on, we're not done. They spent the rest of the day pulling threads, cross-referencing shipping manifests with employee schedules, tracking payment records, building a map of who knew what and when. By the time the sun started setting, Elena's eyes felt like sandpaper, and her brain was running on fumes. Eat, Adrian said, sliding a container of takeout across the table. Elena hadn't even heard him order food. She opened the container and found pad thai, still hot. Her stomach growled so loudly that Adrian raised an eyebrow. When's the last time you ate? Yesterday. Maybe. Maybe. It's been a weird couple of days. He didn't argue with that. They ate in silence for a while, and Elena tried not to think about how surreal this was. Sitting in a warehouse with a mafia boss, hunting for evidence of conspiracy, while eating noodles out of styrofoam. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Adrian looked up from his laptop. You can ask. Why didn't you just kill Marco last night? The bluntness of the question didn't seem to faze him. Because dead men don't give you answers, and right now I need answers more than I need revenge. So you're keeping him alive, for now. He took a sip of water. Marco's been with me for 5 years. I trusted him. That kind of betrayal doesn't happen in a vacuum. Someone got to him. Someone convinced him the risk was worth it. I want to know who. Castellano. Maybe. Or maybe Castellano is just another player. Adrian set down his fork. That's the problem with empires. The bigger they get, the harder it is to see all the moving parts. You start relying on people, delegating authority, and eventually someone realizes they can take a piece for themselves. So why build it in the first place? The question came out before Elena could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. You didn't interrogate men like Adrian Volkov about their life choices. But he didn't shut her down. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same calculating gaze. Control, he said finally. When you grow up with nothing, you learn fast that the world doesn't give you anything for free. You want safety? You take it. You want power? You build it. And once you have it, you hold on with both hands because you know how easily it can slip away. There was something raw in his voice, something that didn't match the cold precision she'd seen so far. For just a second, Elena caught a glimpse of the person beneath the armor. Then it was gone, locked back down behind iron walls. Get some rest, Adrian said, standing. Tomorrow, we talk to Marco. Elena's pulse kicked up. You're letting me in the room? You're the one who caught him. You've earned it. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, Miss Cruz, your father's an idiot. But he raised someone sharp. Don't waste it. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the remnants of dinner and a compliment that felt more dangerous than any threat. The next morning, Marcus picked her up at 5:30 and drove her to a location she was pretty sure didn't exist on any official map. The building was squat and windowless, surrounded by a chain-link fence and enough security cameras to film a movie. Inside, it smelled like concrete and fear. Adrian was already there, standing outside a steel door with his arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his suit was still perfect, his expression still unreadable. He's been talking, Adrian said without preamble. Not saying much, but talking. What's he said so far? That he doesn't know anything. That it was all Castellano's idea. That he's just a soldier following orders. Adrian's jaw tightened. He's lying. How do you know? Because Marco doesn't follow orders. He improvises. He's ambitious. And ambitious people don't take risks unless they think they can win. He opened the door. Let's see if you can get him to admit it. The room on the other side was small and cold. A single table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that was definitely two-way glass. And sitting in one of the chairs, wrists cuffed to the table, was Marco De Luca. He looked worse than he had 2 nights ago. His suit was rumpled, his slicked back hair had fallen into his face, and there was a bruise blooming along his jaw that suggested someone had already tried the hard way to get answers. When he saw Elena, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, then hatred. "You brought her?" Marco's laugh was harsh. "What, you need a schoolgirl to do your interrogations now?" Adrian pulled out the second chair and gestured for Elena to sit. She did, keeping her hands flat on the table, trying to project calm she didn't feel. "Marco," she said evenly, "we need to talk." "I've got nothing to say to you." "That's fine. I'll talk. You listen." She leaned forward slightly. "You threw the poker game. We both know it. Adrian knows it. What I want to know is why." "I already told him." "You told him it was Castellano's plan. But that doesn't make sense." Elena tapped the table with one finger. "Castellano's been moving product through Adrian's network for months. He's making money. He's staying under the radar. Why would he suddenly want to tie Adrian to a debt case involving a random girl and her gambling addict father?" Marco's eyes narrowed. Maybe he saw an opportunity. For what? Leverage? Blackmail? Elena shook her head. No, that's too sloppy, too visible. If Castellano wanted leverage on Adrian, there are a dozen better ways to get it. This wasn't about leverage. This was about distraction. She saw it then, the tiniest flinch. Barely visible, but there. Got you. Someone wanted Adrian focused on me, Elena continued. Someone wanted him looking at debt fraud and rigged poker games while something else was happening. What was it, Marco? What were you covering for? I don't know what you're talking about. The shipments, she pressed. 17 containers in 3 months, all dirty, all moving through Castellano's warehouse. But that's not the end of it, is it? There's something bigger coming, something you needed Adrian distracted for. Marco's jaw worked. You're guessing. Am I? She held his gaze, and for a long moment neither of them blinked. Then Marco let out a long breath and slumped back in his chair. There's a shipment coming in Friday, he said finally. Port of Los Angeles. Container marked as industrial equipment. It's actually 200 kilos of fentanyl. Elena's blood went cold. 200 kilos. That wasn't a side hustle. That was a war. Adrian's voice cut through the silence like a knife. And you were going to let it come through my port, using my credentials, tying it directly to me. Marco didn't deny it. Castellano said if it worked, we'd split the profit, 50-50. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere clean. And if it didn't work, then you'd take the fall. Castellano walks away. I walk away. Everybody wins. Except me. Yeah, Marco laughed bitterly. Except you. But that's the game, isn't it? Someone's always the mark. Adrian was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold it could have frozen blood. Give me the details. Container number, shipping company, contact name, everything. Marco rattled off the information like he was reading a grocery list. Elena committed it to memory, every word, every number. When he was done, Adrian looked at her. Anything else you want to ask? Elena thought about it. Then she said, Why'd you fold that hand, Marco? You could have won. You could have taken the debt yourself and cut Adrian out entirely. Marco's expression twisted into something ugly. Because I'm not stupid. If I'd won, Adrian would have known something was wrong immediately. This way, he thinks he's in control. He thinks he won fair and square. And while he's busy cleaning up your mess, the real shipment comes through clean. Except I caught you. Yeah. Marco's eyes were hard. You did. Congratulations. You just painted a target on your back so big even Adrian won't be able to protect you. Adrian moved so fast, Elena barely saw it. 1 second he was standing by the door, the next he had Marco by the throat again, lifting him half out of the chair. If anything happens to her, Adrian said quietly, I will take you apart piece by piece and mail what's left to Castellano as a warning. Are we clear? Marco choked out something that might have been agreement. Adrian released him and stepped back, his expression smoothing into that same cold mask. We're done here. Marcus will take you back to holding. He walked out without another word, and Elena had to jog to keep up. Friday, she said as they emerged into the hallway. That's 2 days from now. I know. So what do we do? Adrian stopped and turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, She saw something other than cold calculation in his expression. It looked almost like respect. "We set a trap," he said, "and we make sure Castellano walks right into it." The next 48 hours were a blur of planning, preparation, and paranoia. Adrian moved her to a different safe house. This one actually looked like a safe house, with reinforced doors and enough weapons to stage a small coup. He brought in people Elena didn't recognize, specialists in everything from port security to federal law enforcement, and together they built a plan so intricate it made her head spin. The container would come through as scheduled. Adrian's people would intercept it before it reached Castellano's warehouse. And when Castellano showed up to collect his product, they'd be waiting. "What about Marco?" Elena asked on Thursday night, sitting across from Adrian at a table covered in blueprints and surveillance photos. "What about him?" "Are you going to kill him?" Adrian didn't look up from the blueprint. Probably. The casual brutality of it should have shocked her. A week ago, it would have. But now, after everything she'd seen, it just felt inevitable. "He gave you the information," she said anyway. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for a quick death instead of a slow one." Adrian finally met her eyes. "Marco betrayed me, tried to frame me for federal charges. Put you in danger. There's no version of this where he walks away. And that doesn't bother you? Should it?" Elena didn't have an answer for that. She looked back at the blueprints, tracing the route the container would take from the port to the warehouse. Somewhere along that route, everything would either work perfectly or fall apart completely. "You're thinking too loud," Adrian said. "I'm thinking that a lot can go wrong. It can, but it won't." He tapped the blueprint. "We control every variable, the route, the timing, the people. Castellano thinks he's walking into a payday. Instead, he's walking into a cage. And if he doesn't show? Then we burn the shipment and hunt him down the old-fashioned way." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "Either way, this ends Friday night." Elena wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that Adrian Volkov, the man who controlled half the city, had thought of everything. But she'd grown up around gamblers and con artists, and she knew that no plan survived contact with reality. Something was going to go wrong. She just didn't know what yet. Friday came too fast. Elena woke up before dawn. Her nerves wound so tight she could barely breathe. She dressed in the darkest clothes she had and checked her phone obsessively, waiting for word from Adrian. It came at 7 a.m. Container cleared customs. On schedule. "Stay at the safe house until you hear from me. B.S." She read the message 3 times, then deleted it and started pacing. Staying at the safe house felt like torture. She should be there, should be watching this go down, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But Adrian had been firm. She wasn't trained for this, wasn't armed, and her presence would only complicate things. So she waited. Hours crawled by. Elena tried to distract herself with TV, with food, with anything that would stop her from climbing the walls. Nothing worked. At 4 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena's heart stopped. She answered, her hand shaking. "Hello? Miss Cruz?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, male, with an accent she couldn't place. "You don't know me, but I know you, and I have a message." "Who is this?" "A friend, or an enemy. Depends on what you do in the next 10 minutes. Elena's blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" "Adrian Volkov is walking into a trap. The container he's planning to intercept? It's empty. The real shipment came through 3 days ago, and it's already been distributed. Castellano knows he's coming, and when Adrian shows up tonight, he's going to die." The world tilted. "You're lying," Elena managed. "Am I? Then why hasn't Adrian called you in the last 3 hours? Why hasn't he sent an update?" The voice paused. "He's already at the warehouse. And in about..." A pause. 6 minutes, Castellano's people are going to blow the building with him inside. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're useful. And because when this is over, someone's going to need to pick up the pieces. Make the right choice, Miss Cruz. Walk away. Let Adrian burn, and I'll make sure your debt disappears forever." The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing. It could be a lie, a trick to get her to panic, to make a mistake. But the details, the timing, the silence from Adrian, it fit too well. She grabbed her jacket and ran for the door. The streets blurred past as Elena ran, her lungs burning, her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She didn't have a car, didn't have a weapon, didn't have anything except the address burned into her memory from studying those blueprints and a clock ticking down in her head. 6 minutes, the voice had said. That was 4 minutes ago. She flagged down a cab on the corner, practically throwing herself into the back seat. Northside, Industrial District. I'll pay you triple if you get there in under 10 minutes. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror like she was insane. Lady, that's across town. $500, cash, right now. She pulled out the emergency money Adrian's people had left in the safe house and shoved it through the partition. Drive. The driver looked at the bills, then at her face, and made his decision. The cab lurched forward hard enough to throw her back against the seat, and suddenly they were weaving through traffic like they were competing in a street race. Elena's phone buzzed. She looked down, praying it was Adrian telling her this was all a mistake, that he was fine, that everything was under control. It wasn't. Unknown number again. A text this time. Clock's ticking, Miss Cruz. 2 minutes. Are you really going to die for a man you've known less than a week? Her hands shook as she deleted the message. The cab driver was pushing 70 down a residential street, running red lights, and Elena couldn't even tell him to slow down because they weren't moving fast enough. The warehouse came into view, a massive concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fence, dark except for a single light burning over the loading dock. 3 black SUVs were parked outside, the same kind Adrian's people drove. Here, Elena gasped. Stop here. The cab screeched to a halt half a block away. Elena threw open the door and ran, her boots pounding against cracked asphalt. The fence had a gate, padlocked, but there was a gap 20 feet down where the links had been cut and poorly repaired. She squeezed through, tearing her jacket, and sprinted toward the building. No guards outside. That was wrong. Adrian always posted guards. She hit the loading dock door and yanked it open. The interior was dark, cavernous, filled with shipping containers stacked 3 high. Emergency lights cast everything in sickly yellow, and the air smelled like oil and rust and something else, something chemical that made her eyes water. Adrian! Her voice echoed off metal walls. Adrian, where are you? No answer. Elena moved deeper into the warehouse, her pulse hammering so loud she could barely hear her own footsteps. She passed between 2 containers, then froze. There, 20 feet ahead, in the center of a clear space between stacks of cargo, Adrian Volkov stood with his back to her. He wasn't alone. 4 of his men surrounded him, weapons drawn but pointed at the ground. And facing them, standing in a half circle with their own guns raised, were 6 men Elena didn't recognize. In the middle of it all, looking relaxed despite the standoff, was a man in an expensive suit who could only be Castellano. He was older than Elena expected, 50s maybe, with silver hair and the kind of face that probably looked friendly until you saw his eyes. Right now, those eyes were fixed on Adrian with the intensity of a snake watching a mouse. You're predictable, Volkov, Castellano was saying. That's always been your weakness. You think you're 10 steps ahead, but really you're just following the same playbook over and over. Adrian's voice was ice. Is that why you're pointing guns at me in my own warehouse? Your warehouse? Castellano laughed. That's the thing about empires built on fear. The second someone stops being afraid, the whole thing falls apart. And I stopped being afraid of you about 6 months ago. When you started stealing from me. When I started taking what should have been mine from the beginning. Castellano took a step closer. You think you run this city? You're just a figurehead. The real power is in the supply chain, and I control that now. Your network, your ports, your distribution, it's all mine. You just haven't figured it out yet. Elena's mind raced. She needed to do something, needed to move, but there were too many guns and too few options. If she ran forward, they'd see her. If she ran back, Adrian would die. Then she saw it. 10 feet to her left, half hidden behind a shipping container, was a control panel. Switches and buttons and a lever marked emergency shutdown. She didn't know what it controlled, ventilation maybe, or the loading dock doors, but it didn't matter. She just needed a distraction. Elena moved as quietly as she could, staying low, using the containers as cover. Her fingers found the lever. She said a silent prayer to whoever was listening, and pulled. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Alarms shrieked. Emergency lights strobed red and white. Somewhere overhead, a sprinkler system kicked in, dumping water across the entire space. And the loading dock doors, massive steel things that weighed probably a ton each, began grinding closed with a sound like the world ending. Everyone spun towards the noise. Adrian moved first. He drove his elbow backward into the gut of the man closest to him, grabbed the gun from the man's holster, and put 3 rounds into Castellano's people before anyone else had processed what was happening. His men followed his lead, and suddenly the warehouse was a war zone. Gunfire echoed like thunder. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark. Elena pressed herself against the container, hands over her ears, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Fall back!" Adrian's voice cut through the noise. "Fall back to the east exit." His men moved as a unit, covering each other as they retreated deeper into the warehouse. Castellano's people returned fire, bullets sparking off metal, but they were disorganized now, shouting over each other. Elena saw Adrian glance back, scanning the space, and for one horrible second their eyes met. His expression went from cold focus to something close to panic in an instant. "Elena!" He changed direction, moving toward her instead of the exit. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life," she shouted back. "You're going to get yourself killed." A bullet punched through the container 6 inches from her head. Elena yelped and dropped to the ground. Adrian reached her a second later, grabbed her arm, and dragged her behind a stack of crates. "I told you to stay at the safe house," he said, and he actually sounded angry. "Someone called me, said this was a trap, said Castellano was going to blow the building with you inside." Adrian's jaw tightened. "When?" 15 minutes ago. They said I had 6 minutes." He looked at his watch, then his expression changed. "They were stalling you." "What?" "Keeping you on the phone, making sure you didn't warn me until it was too late." He pulled out his own phone, checked something, and swore viciously. "We need to leave. Right now." "Why? What's—" The explosion cut her off. It started on the far side of the warehouse, a massive boom that shook the entire structure. Fire bloomed orange and white, consuming 2 shipping containers in seconds. The shockwave knocked Elena off her feet, and if Adrian hadn't grabbed her jacket, she would have slammed face first into concrete. "Move!" He hauled her upright and started running, still gripping her arm. "East exit! Go, go, go! Go!" They ran through smoke and fire, dodging falling debris. Behind them, Elena could hear screaming. Castellano's men, maybe, or Adrian's. She couldn't tell anymore. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time, and part of the ceiling collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Adrian kicked open a door marked Emergency Exit and shoved Elena through. They burst out into an alley just as a third explosion tore through the warehouse's center. The building groaned, steel support beams warping under the heat, and then the whole western wall came down in a roar of destruction. Elena stumbled, her ears ringing, her vision swimming with afterimages. Adrian caught her before she fell and kept them moving, away from the building, away from the fire. They made it 3 blocks before he finally stopped, pulling her into the shadows between 2 buildings. His face was streaked with soot, and there was blood on his collar, but he didn't look hurt. "Are you hit?" he demanded, running his hands over her shoulders, her arms, checking for wounds. "I'm fine. Are you—" "I'm fine." He stepped back, his expression shuddering. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking you were about to die." "So you ran into a firefight unarmed and untrained because a stranger on the phone told you to?" His voice was sharp enough to cut. "That's the kind of decision that gets people killed, Elena." "You're welcome, by the way," she shot back, "for the distraction that kept you from getting executed. I had it under control. You had 6 guns pointed at you, and I've had worse." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him in waves. "You don't understand what you just walked into. Castellano wasn't bluffing. Those explosions were pre-planted charges. If we'd been 30 seconds slower, we weren't. But we could have been." He grabbed her shoulders again, but gently this time. "You can't do things like this. You can't put yourself in that kind of danger." "Why not? You do it all the time." "That's different." "How?" "Because I'm expendable." The words came out harsh, raw. "Because if I die, someone else takes over. The empire keeps running. But you—" He stopped himself, his grip tightening. "You're not part of this world. You shouldn't be." Elena stared at him, something clicking into place. "But I am. The second my father put me on that table, I became part of this. There's no going back." Adrian didn't have an answer for that. He just looked at her, his expression complicated in ways she couldn't read. Then his phone rang. He pulled it out, checked the screen, and answered. Talk. Elena couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Adrian's expression darken with every second. How many? A pause. Jesus. What about Castellano? Another pause. Find him. I don't care what it takes. Find him. He hung up and looked at Elena. 3 of my men are dead. 2 more critical, and Castellano wasn't in the warehouse when it blew. What? He left before the first explosion. Someone tipped him off. Adrian's eyes were cold now, all the earlier concern locked back down. Which means we have a leak, and it's not Marco. Elena's mind raced. The phone call, the one warning me, it wasn't trying to save you, it was trying to get me out of the safe house. Why? I don't know. But they knew I'd run if I thought you were in danger. They counted on it. She thought back to the voice on the phone. Male. Accent she couldn't place. They said when this was over, someone would need to pick up the pieces. They said they'd clear my debt if I walked away. Adrian's expression went very still. They tried to recruit you. Looks like it. And you came here anyway. Elena met his eyes. I made a deal. 30 days. I'm not walking away before it's done. Something shifted in Adrian's face. Not quite a smile, but close. You're either incredibly loyal or incredibly stupid. Can it be both? This time he did smile, brief and unexpected. Then his phone buzzed again. He checked it, and the smile vanished. We need to move. Castellano's people know we got out. They'll be looking for us. Where do we go? Somewhere they won't think to look. He started walking, and Elena fell into step beside him. I have a place outside the city, off the books. We'll regroup there. They walked in silence for a while, sticking to back alleys and side streets. Elena's adrenaline was starting to crash, leaving her shaky and cold. She could still smell smoke in her hair, could still hear the echo of gunfire. Adrian, she said quietly, that call. They knew exactly when to call me. They knew I'd panic. They knew I'd run. Someone's been watching you. For how long? I don't know, but we're going to find out. He glanced at her. Did you recognize the voice? No, but... Elena stopped walking. Wait, they said the real shipment came through 3 days ago. How would they know that unless they were involved? Adrian's eyes sharpened. What else did they say? Exact words. Elena closed her eyes, replaying the conversation. They said the container you were planning to intercept was empty, that the real shipment was already distributed, and that when this was over, someone would need to pick up the pieces. Pick up the pieces, Adrian repeated. Not take over, not seize control. Pick up the pieces. What's the difference? The difference is intent. He started walking again, faster now. Someone's not trying to destroy my empire. They're trying to fragment it, break it into smaller pieces they can control individually. That's worse than just taking over. Much worse. Because it means this isn't about money or territory. It's about dismantling everything I've built and making sure it can never be put back together. They reached a parking garage and Adrian led her to a nondescript sedan on the 3rd level. He did a quick check underneath, looking for bombs, Elena realized with a jolt, then unlocked it and gestured for her to get in. The drive took 40 minutes, heading northwest out of the city into an area where streetlights became sparse and houses gave way to trees. Adrian didn't speak, his attention split between the road and the rear-view mirror, checking constantly for tails. Finally, he turned down a private road marked no trespassing and drove another mile before pulling up to a small cabin tucked into the woods. It looked like something out of a different era, log construction, stone chimney, windows dark and unwelcoming. Home sweet home, Adrian said without inflection. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. One main room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a loft bedroom accessible by ladder. Adrian went straight to a cabinet, pulled out a first aid kit, and tossed it to Elena. Clean yourself up. There's blood on your temple. Elena touched her face, and her fingers came away red. She hadn't even felt it happen. She went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The cut was small, just above her eyebrow, probably from flying debris. She cleaned it carefully, watching herself in the mirror and trying to process the fact that she'd just survived her first firefight. When she came back out, Adrian had started a fire in the stone fireplace and was sitting on the floor in front of it, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He'd cleaned the blood off his neck, and Elena could see a graze wound along his collarbone. "You said you were fine," she said. "I am fine. It's shallow. Let me look at it." "Elena, let me look at it." He sighed, but didn't stop her when she sat down beside him with the first aid kit. The wound was exactly what he'd said, a graze, not deep, but it needed to be cleaned and bandaged. She worked carefully, aware of how close they were, how quiet the cabin was. "You didn't have to come after me," Adrian said finally. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Elena didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't want to say it out loud. That somewhere in the last week, this had stopped being about survival and started being about something else. That when she'd gotten that call, the only thing she could think was not him. "Because no one else was going to," she said instead. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your 30 days are up in 3 weeks. When this is over, you can walk away clean. New identity if you want it. Money to start over. Whatever you need." "I know. So why risk it? Why not just wait it out at the safe house?" Elena finished bandaging his shoulder and sat back. "Because I'm tired of watching other people make decisions about my life. My father. Castellano. Even you, at the beginning. Everyone acting like I'm just a piece on the board." "You're not," Adrian said quietly. "Then what am I?" He looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no calculation in his expression. No strategy. Just something raw and honest that made her chest tighten. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but you're not a piece on the board." The fire crackled between them, and Elena realized her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, from something else entirely. "We should sleep," she said, standing up quickly. "Figure out the next move in the morning." Adrian nodded. "You take the loft. I'll stay down here." Elena climbed the ladder and collapsed onto the narrow bed, still fully clothed. Her mind was racing, replaying the explosion, the phone call, the look in Adrian's eyes when he'd realized she was in the warehouse. Below, she could hear him moving around, checking windows, securing the door, making sure they were safe. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could see was fire. Morning came cold and gray. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and found Adrian already awake, sitting at the small table with his laptop open. He looked like he'd been up for hours. "Anything?" she asked, climbing down from the loft. "Castellano's gone to ground. No one's seen him since last night, but I've got people looking." He pushed a mug of coffee toward her. "Drink. We have work to do." "What kind of work?" Adrian turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a list of names, maybe 30 of them, with notes beside each one. Locations. Connections. Suspected loyalties. "These are the people who could have tipped off Castellano," Adrian said. "I need you to help me narrow it down." Elena scanned the list. Most of the names meant nothing to her, but a few she recognized from the poker game or the warehouse briefings. "How do we narrow it?" "By finding who benefits most from chaos." Adrian pulled up another file, financial records, densely packed with numbers. "Castellano's operation requires infrastructure, warehouses, transport, distribution networks. Someone had to help him set that up without me noticing. That person is on this list." They spent the next 3 hours combing through data, cross-referencing transactions, building a picture of who was connected to what. It was tedious work, the kind that made Elena's eyes blur and her head ache, but slowly a pattern emerged. "Here," she said, pointing to a series of payments. "These all go to the same shell company. But the company's listed owner is..." She checked the name against Adrian's list. "Vincent Torres." "Who is he?" Adrian's expression darkened. "My accountant." "He's been moving money for Castellano?" "For 6 months. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger alerts. But it adds up." Adrian ran the numbers. $2 million, maybe more. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a war chest. Adrian closed the laptop and stood. "I need to make some calls." He stepped outside, and Elena watched through the window as he paced the small clearing, phone pressed to his ear. His body language was tense, controlled fury barely held in check. When he came back inside, his expression was grim. "Torres is gone. Cleaned out his office yesterday afternoon. His apartment's empty." He knew we'd figure it out.
He knew, or someone told him. Adrian sat down heavily. This keeps getting deeper. Every answer leads to 3 more questions. So what do we do? We go back to basics. Find my father. Elena blinked. Your father?
Victor. Your father. Adrian's expression was unreadable. He's the one piece of this that doesn't make sense. Castellano could have framed me without involving him. The debt, the poker game, it was all unnecessary complexity, unless there's a reason he wanted Victor specifically. Elena's stomach twisted. You think my dad's involved? I think we need to find out. They left the cabin an hour later, Adrian making arrangements by phone, while Elena tried not to think about what they might discover. Her father had already betrayed her once. The idea that he might be tangled up in something even bigger made her feel sick. The drive back to the city took 30 minutes. Adrian didn't take her to another safe house. Instead, he pulled up to a rundown motel on the south side. The kind of place where you paid in cash and didn't ask questions. Room 12, he said. He checked in 3 days ago under a fake name, but my people found him. Elena's hands were shaking as she got out of the car. She'd spent the last week trying not to think about her father, trying to bury the anger and hurt under layers of survival instinct. Now it all came rushing back. Adrian knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Victor, open the door. We need to talk. Still nothing. Adrian pulled out a key card. Apparently he'd gotten it from the motel manager, and unlocked the door. The room beyond was dark and smelled like cigarettes and desperation. And sitting on the edge of the bed, looking like he'd aged a decade in the last week, was Victor Cruz. He looked up when they entered, and the expression on his face was pure defeat. Elena, he said hoarsely. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Save it, Adrian said coldly. We need answers, and you're going to give them to us. Victor's hands were shaking. I didn't know, I swear, I didn't know it would go this far. What wouldn't go this far? Elena demanded. Her father looked at her, and there were tears in his eyes. The debt, the poker game, it was all a setup. Castellano approached me 6 months ago, said if I helped him, he'd clear my gambling debts and set me up somewhere safe. I just had to play along. Elena's world tilted. You knew from the beginning? I thought it was just about money, just another con. I didn't know he was planning to... Victor's voice broke. I didn't know he'd try to kill you. The words hung in the air like poison. Adrian's voice was ice. What did Castellano want with Elena? He said she was bait, that Volkov would protect her because he's... Victor stopped, seeming to realize he'd said too much. Because I'm what? Adrian's tone could have cut steel. Victor wouldn't meet his eyes. Because you have a weakness for people who remind you of your sister. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Elena looked at Adrian, saw something crack in his carefully controlled expression. You have a sister? Had, Adrian said, his voice hollow. She died 10 years ago, caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. The pieces clicked together in Elena's mind. The way Adrian had looked at her in the poker room, the way he'd insisted on protecting her. It hadn't been about the debt or the conspiracy. It had been about a ghost he couldn't save. The silence in that motel room was suffocating. Elena stared at her father, trying to process what he'd just said. Bait. She'd been bait. Not collateral, not a mistake, but a deliberate piece of someone else's strategy to get inside Adrian Volkov's head. How much did he pay you? Her voice came out flat, empty of everything except a kind of numb curiosity. Victor flinched. 50,000. Up front. Another 50 when it was done. When what was done? When you were under Volkov's protection. When Castellano had his hook in. Victor's hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. He said it was just about leverage, about having something Volkov would want to protect. I didn't know about the explosions, the drugs, any of it. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. Elena took a step toward him, and Victor actually shrank back. You sold me. Again. You didn't just gamble me away, you handed me over on purpose. I was desperate. I owed money to people who were going to kill me. So you thought you'd get me killed instead? No, Victor's voice cracked. I thought Volkov would protect you. I thought you'd be safer with him than with me. Adrian's laugh was harsh and humorless. That's a hell of a justification.
It's the truth. Victor looked at him now, something pleading in his expression. Castellano said you had a pattern, that you protected people who reminded you of someone you lost. He showed me pictures of your sister, said Elena looked just like her. Same age she would have been, same build, same... Enough. Adrian's voice cut like a whip. I don't need you to explain my psychology to me. I'm just trying to make you understand. I understand perfectly. You took money to set up your daughter. The why doesn't matter. Elena's chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around her ribs and was slowly tightening them. She'd known her father was weak, had known he was selfish and desperate, and willing to sacrifice anything to save himself. But knowing it and hearing him admit it were two different things. Where's Castellano now? She asked. I don't know. He stopped contacting me after the poker game, just sent the money and disappeared. When did you last see him? Victor thought about it. 4 days ago. He came here, said things were moving faster than planned, said I should stay out of sight until it was over. Did he say what was moving faster? Adrian asked. No, just that you were proving harder to kill than expected. Victor looked at Adrian with something almost like respect. He didn't expect you to figure out the shipping manifest so fast, didn't expect Elena to spot the rigged game. Where was he going? When he left here, where was he headed? I don't know. He didn't tell me anything. Adrian pulled out his phone and made a call. I need a trace on Victor Cruz's phone. Every call, every text, everyone he's been in contact with for the last 6 months. He paused. I don't care if it takes all night. Do it. He hung up and looked at Elena. We should go. But Elena didn't move. She was still staring at her father, this man who'd raised her and ruined her in equal measure, and trying to figure out if she felt anything at all. You're pathetic, she said finally. You know that? Victor's face crumbled. Elena, please. No, I'm done. She turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back. I hope the money was worth it, because you just lost the only person in the world who gave a damn whether you lived or died. She walked out before he could respond, Adrian following close behind. The door clicked shut, and Elena made it exactly 3 steps before her knees gave out. Adrian caught her before she hit the pavement, his arm around her waist, holding her up. Breathe, just breathe. He knew, she gasped. From the beginning, he knew exactly what he was doing. I know. He sold me for $100,000. I know. Elena's vision blurred. She wasn't crying. She was too angry to cry, but her whole body was shaking with a rage so intense she thought it might burn through her skin. I want him dead. I want to walk back in there and... You don't. Adrian's voice was calm, steady. Trust me, you don't. How do you know? Because I've done it, and it doesn't fix anything. The honesty in his voice cut through her anger like cold water. Elena took a shaky breath, then another, forcing herself back under control. When she could stand on her own, Adrian let her go, though he stayed close. What happens to him? She asked. What do you want to happen? Elena thought about it. A week ago, she might have said she wanted him safe, protected, forgiven. Now? I want him to live with what he did. I want him to wake up every day knowing he destroyed his own daughter to save himself. And I want him to know that when he dies, he'll die alone. Adrian nodded slowly. I can make that happen. How? I'll spread the word that he's a liability, that he talks too much, knows too much, can't be trusted. Every crew in the city will avoid him. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for a bullet that'll never come because no one will consider him worth the effort. It was cruel, calculated. Exactly the kind of punishment that would eat Victor alive from the inside. Do it, Elena said. They got back in the car and drove in silence for a while. Elena watched the city pass by outside the window, lights and people in a world that kept spinning no matter how badly yours fell apart. Your sister, she said quietly. What was her name? Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sophia. What happened to her? Wrong place, wrong time. She was coming out of a coffee shop when 2 crews decided to settle a dispute in the middle of the street, caught 3 bullets meant for someone else. His voice was eerily calm, like he was reciting facts from a report. She was 19, pre-med student, never hurt anyone in her life. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 10 years ago. But the way he said it told Elena it might as well have been yesterday.
Is that why you do this? She asked. Build the empire? Control everything? So nothing like that happens again? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I do this because after Sophia died, I realized the only way to be safe is to make sure everyone else is more afraid of you than you are of them. Control the chaos before it controls you. Does it work? Sometimes. He glanced at her. And then sometimes a girl walks into a poker room and ruins 6 months of careful planning in under 3 minutes. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Sorry about that. Don't be. You saved me from walking into a trap. You saved me from being owned by someone who probably would have killed me the first time I was inconvenient. Then we're even. They pulled up to a different safe house. This one actually looked lived in, with furniture that didn't match and windows that had curtains. Adrian led her inside and gestured to the couch. Sit. I need to make some calls. Elena sat, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. It was barely noon, but she felt like she'd been awake for days. She could still smell smoke in her hair from the warehouse explosion, could still feel the phantom press of her father's betrayal like a knife between her ribs. Adrian disappeared into another room, his voice a low murmur through the walls. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to think about anything at all. She must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes again, the light had changed. Late afternoon, maybe early evening, and sitting across from her in an armchair was Adrian, watching her with an unreadable expression. How long was I out? She asked. 3 hours. You should have woken me. You needed the sleep. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I heard back from my people. They traced your father's phone records. Elena sat up straighter. And? Castellano's been calling him from the same number for 6 months. Burner phone, but it pinged off cell towers in a specific area. Downtown, near the financial district. That's a lot of ground to cover. It is, but there's only one building in that area that Castellano has any connection to. Adrian pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. The Meridian Hotel. Luxury high-rise. Top 3 floors are private residences owned by shell companies. One of those companies is linked to Vincent Torres. Your accountant. Former accountant, who's currently helping Castellano hide. Adrian's expression was cold. I'm going to pay them a visit tonight. I'm coming with you. No. Yes. Elena, you don't get to protect me anymore. She stood up, meeting his eyes. I'm in this, all the way in. My father made sure of that. So either I come with you or I go on my own. Your choice. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he said, You don't have training. You don't know how to handle yourself in a fight. Then teach me. In what, 3 hours? Teach me enough. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him, because he stood and gestured toward the back of the apartment. Fine, but if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Understood? Understood. The next 3 hours were the most physically demanding of Elena's life. Adrian didn't go easy on her. He showed her how to punch without breaking her thumb, how to use someone's momentum against them, where to aim if she needed to drop someone fast. He drilled her on basic holds and escapes until her muscles burned and her lungs felt like they were on fire. Again, he said, standing across from her in the cleared space of the living room. Elena lunged, trying to replicate the move he'd shown her. Adrian blocked it easily, twisted her arm, and had her face down on the floor in under 2 seconds. You're telegraphing, he said. I can see it coming a mile away. Don't wind up, just move. He let her up. She tried again. This time she managed to get her arm around his neck before he flipped her onto her back. Better. But you're still thinking too much. Stop planning and just react. They went again and again and again. By the time Adrian finally called a halt, Elena was drenched in sweat and breathing hard, but she'd managed to land a solid hit on his ribs. Good, he said, and there was genuine approval in his voice. You're a fast learner. I had a good teacher. Don't let it go to your head. You're still going to get yourself killed if you try anything stupid tonight. Elena grabbed a water bottle and drained half of it. What's the plan? We go in quiet. Torres has a penthouse on the 42nd floor. I've got blueprints of the building, security schedules, everything we need. We find him. We find out where Castellano is, and we end this. And if Torres doesn't talk? Adrian's smile was cold. He'll talk. They left at 8 p.m., dressed in dark clothes that wouldn't stand out. Adrian had a gun in a shoulder holster and a knife strapped to his ankle. He'd offered Elena a weapon, but she'd declined. She was more likely to shoot herself than anyone else. The Meridian Hotel rose like a steel and glass monument to excess, all gleaming surfaces and doormen in suits. Adrian bypassed the main entrance and led Elena to a service door around the side. He pulled out a key card. Apparently he had access to half the buildings in the city, and let them in. They took the service elevator to the 41st floor, then climbed the stairs the rest of the way. The penthouse level was quiet, carpeted in thick luxury that swallowed sound. Only 4 units on this floor, each one probably worth more than Elena would make in her lifetime. Adrian checked the hallway, then led her to the last door on the left. He pulled out a lockpick set and went to work on the door. "Where'd you learn that?" Elena whispered. "Same place I learned everything else, the street." The lock clicked open. "Stay behind me." They slipped inside, and Elena's first thought was that whoever lived here had terrible taste. Everything was white and chrome, sterile as an operating room. No personal touches, no photographs, nothing that suggested an actual human being lived here. Adrian moved through the space like a ghost, checking rooms methodically. Elena followed, her heart hammering, expecting someone to jump out at any second. But the penthouse was empty. "Damn it," Adrian muttered. "They're already gone." "Wait," Elena pointed to the kitchen counter. "Look." There was a laptop sitting there, still open, the screen dark but not fully closed. And next to it, a half-empty coffee cup. Adrian touched the cup. "Still warm." "They left recently." "Maybe less than an hour ago." He opened the laptop. The screen came to life, no password protection, and what Elena saw made her blood run cold. It was a live security feed, multiple camera angles, all showing the same location, the warehouse where they'd been yesterday, or what was left of it. The building was a scorched shell now, debris everywhere, but the cameras were still active. And in the corner of the screen, a chat window was open. Adrian scrolled through the conversation, his expression darkening with every line. Torres. Volkov survived. He got out before the charges blew. Unknown. Doesn't matter. Phase 2 is already in motion. Torres. What about the girl? Unknown. She's more useful than we expected. Volkov's protecting her exactly like we predicted. Let them run. Let them think they're hunting us. When the time is right, we'll close the trap. Torres. When? Unknown. Tomorrow night. The tournament. He'll come because she'll make him come. And when he does, we'll have them both. The tournament. Elena's mind raced, trying to remember where she'd heard that before. Then it clicked. The high-stakes poker tournament she'd seen advertised all over the city, public event, big money, lots of witnesses. "It's another setup," she said. "Of course it is." Adrian pulled out his phone and started typing. "They want me to walk into a public space where they control the variables, where they can take me out without it looking like a hit. So we don't go. We don't have a choice. If we don't show, they'll come for us anyway. At least this way, we know when and where." Elena grabbed his arm. "Adrian, this is insane. They're expecting you. They'll be ready." "I know. So what do we do?" He looked at her and there was something fierce in his expression. "We give them exactly what they want, and then we flip the table." They spent the rest of the night planning. Adrian called in people Elena had never met, specialists in everything from security to sleight of hand. They spread blueprints across the dining table of the safe house and mapped out every entrance, every exit, every possible angle of attack. The tournament was being held at the Diamond Crown Casino, the same place where this had all started. "Full circle," Elena murmured. "Poetic, isn't it?" Adrian didn't look up from the blueprints. "Castellano thinks he's being clever, using the same location to close the loop, but it also means I know the terrain." "He knows you know it." "Which is why he's counting on me being arrogant enough to think I can outsmart him on home ground." Adrian tapped a spot on the blueprint. "The tournament's on the main floor. Public event, which means security will be tight, but not insurmountable. Castellano will have people placed throughout the room, dealers, spectators, maybe even security. So how do we know who to trust? We don't trust anyone." He looked at Elena. "Except each other." The weight of those words settled between them like a physical thing.
I'm not a fighter, Elena said quietly. I'm not trained for this. What if I mess up? What if I get you killed? You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Adrian straightened, meeting her eyes. You've survived everything thrown at you so far. Your father's betrayal, a rigged poker game, a warehouse explosion. You're still standing. That's not luck, Elena. That's steel.
She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel as confident as he sounded, but all she could think about was the weight of the gun in his holster, the cold efficiency in his planning, and the fact that in less than 24 hours, they'd be walking into a trap with no guarantee of walking back out. What happens if we win? She asked. We dismantle Castellano's operation, expose everyone involved, take back control. And if we lose? Adrian didn't answer right away. Then he said, if we lose, you make sure you're the one who gets out, whatever it takes. That's not whatever it takes, Elena. His voice was hard. You don't sacrifice yourself for me. You don't play hero. You survive. Understood? She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't going to leave him behind, but the look in his eyes told her this wasn't a negotiation. Understood, she lied. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Adrian drilled her on the plan until she could recite it in her sleep. Where to stand, where to move, what to watch for. He gave her an earpiece so they could communicate and made her practice using it until she could sub-vocalize without moving her lips. You're going to be at the table with me, he said, sitting beside me like you did that first night. Castellano will expect it. It fits his narrative. That you're protecting me because I remind you of your sister. Yes. Adrian's expression was carefully neutral. Let him think that. Let him think he knows exactly how to manipulate me. It'll make him overconfident. And when he makes his move, you signal me. 3 words. The game's rigged, just like you did that first night, and then you get out of the room as fast as you can. Elena nodded, her throat tight. The plan was simple on paper. In reality, it had about 1,000 ways to go wrong. Evening came too fast. Adrian handed her a dress, black, elegant, the kind of thing you wore to expensive events. She changed in the bathroom and barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked older, harder, like someone who'd seen too much in too short a time. When she came out, Adrian was in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her rent. He looked every inch the powerful businessman, no hint of the violence she knew he was capable of. Ready? He asked. Elena took a breath. No, but let's go anyway. The Diamond Crown Casino was exactly as she remembered, glittering excess and barely concealed danger. But this time, she wasn't being dragged through against her will. She walked in on Adrian's arm like she belonged there, head high, refusing to show fear. The tournament was in the main ballroom, transformed into a high-stakes poker arena. Tables arranged in a grid, each one surrounded by spectators. Cameras everywhere. The whole thing designed to be a spectacle. Adrian led her to the center table, the one reserved for the highest buy-in. 10 players, all men except for one woman in her 60s who looked like she could kill you with a glance. And sitting directly across from Adrian's assigned seat, smiling like he'd already won, was Castellano. Volkov, he said genially, so glad you could make it. And you brought your good luck charm. Adrian pulled out a chair for Elena, his movements controlled and deliberate. Wouldn't miss it. Of course not. You never could resist a good game. Castellano's eyes flicked to Elena. How are you, Miss Cruz? Recovered from your little adventure at the warehouse? Elena met his gaze and smiled. I've had worse weeks. I'm sure you have. Growing up with Victor Cruz as a father couldn't have been easy. The casual mention of her father's name was deliberate, a reminder that Castellano knew everything about her, that he'd planned this from the beginning. My father made his choices, Elena said evenly. I'm making mine. Indeed you are. Castellano leaned back in his chair. Well then, shall we play? The dealer began shuffling. Elena watched his hands, looking for the tells she'd learned to spot. The cut was clean. The shuffle looked legitimate, but she didn't trust it for a second. The first hand was dealt. Adrian played conservatively, folding after the flop. Elena watched the other players, cataloging their tells, their patterns. The woman was aggressive, raising on weak hands. The man to Adrian's right was methodical, only betting when he had something solid. And Castellano played like he had nothing to lose. 3 hands in, Elena spotted it. The dealer's ring. It was black metal, innocuous. But every time he dealt, she saw a tiny flash of light reflecting off its surface. And every time that flash appeared, Castellano's cards improved. Marked cards. Again. She waited until the next hand was dealt, watching carefully. There. Another flash. And Castellano's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Elena touched her earpiece, sub-vocalizing so quietly only Adrian could hear. The game's rigged. Adrian's expression didn't change. He called the current bet, waited for the flop, then stood abruptly. "I need some air," he announced. "Leaving so soon?" Castellano's smile didn't waver. "We've barely started. Just stepping out. Miss Cruz will keep my seat warm." He walked away before anyone could object, and Elena found herself alone at the table, surrounded by players who probably wanted her dead. The dealer looked at her. "Are you playing the hand, miss?" Elena looked down at her cards. Pair of eights. Nothing special. She pushed half her chips into the center. "I'm playing." The tension around the table was thick enough to choke on. Elena kept her expression neutral as the dealer laid out the flop. King of hearts. 8 of clubs. 3 of diamonds. She had 3 of a kind, but that didn't matter. Not when the deck was marked and Castellano knew exactly what everyone was holding. She glanced around the room, searching for Adrian. He'd disappeared into the crowd of spectators, and for a moment panic clawed at her throat. Then she caught a glimpse of him near the bar, speaking quietly into his phone. Whatever he was doing, she needed to buy him time. "Raise," she said, pushing more chips forward. The methodical player to her right folded immediately. The aggressive woman studied Elena for a long moment, then called. Castellano smiled and raised again. "You're bold, Miss Cruz," he said. "I admire that. Most people in your position would have folded by now." "Most people don't know when they're being cheated." The words came out before she could stop them. Around the table, conversations died. The dealer's hands stilled, and Castellano's smile widened. "That's a serious accusation," he said softly. "It's a serious crime." Elena kept her voice steady. "The dealer's ring. It's catching light off marked cards. Same setup as the game my father played. You're running the same con twice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The tournament director materialized at the edge of the table, his face pale. "Miss Cruz, if you're making an allegation of cheating..." "I am." Elena turned to look at him. "Check the deck. Check the dealer's ring. You'll find I'm right." Castellano leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed. "By all means, check whatever you like. I have nothing to hide." The director looked between them, clearly caught between a rock and a hard place. Accusing a player of cheating at a public tournament was a scandal. Not investigating the accusation was worse. "Sir," he said to the dealer, "your ring, please." The dealer hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then he slipped the ring off and handed it over. The director examined it under the light, turning it slowly. Elena watched his expression change as he found what she knew was there, a tiny camera embedded in the band, so small you'd never see it unless you were looking. "Security," the director said, his voice tight. "Detain this man." The dealer bolted. He shoved back from the table and ran, knocking over chips and scattering cards. Security guards converged from 3 directions, but he was fast, ducking under arms and weaving through the crowd. And then Adrian stepped into his path. The dealer saw him too late. He tried to change direction, but Adrian caught him by the collar and slammed him face first into the nearest wall. The impact was hard enough that Elena heard it from 20 feet away. "Going somewhere?" Adrian's voice was cold steel. The dealer struggled, but Adrian had him pinned. Security caught up a second later, pulling the man's arms behind his back and snapping cuffs on his wrists. "Get him out of here," the tournament director ordered, "and someone bring me the surveillance footage from the last hour." Adrian released the dealer and walked back to the table, straightening his cuffs like nothing had happened. His eyes found Elena's, and she saw the question there. She gave a tiny nod. "I'm okay." But Castellano was already standing. "Well," he said, brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. "That was entertaining, but I think I'll bow out of this particular game. Seems the integrity has been compromised." "Sit down," Adrian said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said sit down." "We're not finished." Castellano's expression hardened. "I don't take orders from you anymore, Volkov. You do tonight. Because if you walk out of this room, every person here is going to wonder why you're so eager to leave after your dealer got caught cheating. They're going to wonder if maybe you were involved. And in about 3 minutes, when my people finish reviewing the security footage, they're going to see exactly how involved you were." The color drained from Castellano's face. Adrian gestured to the chair. "So, sit. Let's finish this properly. No marked cards, no rigged dealers, just you and me and an honest game. Unless you're afraid you can't win without cheating." It was a trap, and everyone knew it, but Castellano's pride wouldn't let him back down, not in front of this many witnesses. He sat. The tournament director cleared his throat. "We'll need a new dealer and a fresh deck." "I'll deal," Elena said. Every head turned toward her. "Absolutely not," the director sputtered. "Miss Cruz, you're not qualified, just—" "She's qualified." Adrian's voice cut through the protest. "She's been playing cards since she was 8 years old. She knows every shuffle, every cut, every trick in the book. And unlike your dealers, she doesn't work for anyone at this table." The director looked ready to argue, but the crowd was already murmuring approval. The story was too good. The girl who'd exposed the first rigged game, now dealing the final showdown. It was the kind of drama that would be talked about for years. "Fine," the director said finally. "But we're using a sealed deck from the vault. And Miss Cruz, if there's even a hint of impropriety—" "There won't be." Elena stood and moved to the dealer's position. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them still. "Bring the deck." They brought 3 sealed decks and let Castellano choose one. He picked the middle option, opened it himself, and spread the cards across the felt to verify they were unmarked. Elena gathered them and began to shuffle. She'd learned from the best. Her father, for all his faults, had been a master with cards. She let muscle memory take over, her hands moving through the familiar motions. Riffle, bridge, cascade. The cards whispered against each other like secrets. "House rules," Adrian said. "Texas Hold'em. No limit. Winner takes the pot and walks away clean." "Agreed," Castellano said. Elena dealt 2 cards to each player, her movements precise. Adrian checked his cards without expression. Castellano did the same. The betting started small. Both players calling, neither committing. Elena burned a card and dealt the flop. Ace of spades, jack of hearts, 5 of clubs. Adrian bet 5,000. Castellano raised to 10. Adrian called. Elena dealt the turn. Queen of diamonds. Adrian checked. Castellano bet 20,000. Adrian raised to 40. Castellano studied him, looking for tells. But Adrian's face was a mask, giving away nothing. "Call," Castellano said finally. Elena burned another card and dealt the river. 10 of spades. The crowd had gone silent. The tension was unbearable. Adrian pushed his remaining chips into the center. "All in." Castellano stared at the pot, at Adrian, at the community cards. Elena watched his face and saw the exact moment he convinced himself he had the winning hand. "Call." They flipped their cards. Castellano had ace-king, top pair with a king kicker. Adrian had king-10, 2 pair, kings and tens. Castellano's face went slack with shock, then red with fury. "You got lucky," he spat. "Did I?" Adrian collected his chips calmly. "Or did you make assumptions about what I'd play? You thought I'd fold to your aggression. You thought I needed the perfect hand to stay in. But that's always been your problem, Castellano. You underestimate people." He stood gathering his winnings. "This was fun. We should do it again sometime." "Oh, wait. We can't. Because you're finished." Castellano lunged. He came across the table with a roar, hands reaching for Adrian's throat. But Adrian was ready. He sidestepped, and Castellano crashed into the empty chair. Security was moving, but not fast enough. Castellano pulled a gun. Screams erupted. People dove for cover. Elena froze, staring down the barrel of a weapon pointed directly at Adrian's chest. "You think you've won?" Castellano's voice was shaking with rage. "You think any of this matters? I've been bleeding your empire dry for months. Your ports, your shipments, your money, it's all mine now. And when you're dead, there won't be anyone left to stop me." "You're right," Adrian said calmly. "If I died, there'd be no one to stop you. But I'm not going to die." "You sure about that?" "Very sure. Because you're not going to shoot me in a room full of witnesses. You're not that stupid. Try me." "Go ahead." Adrian spread his arms. "Pull the trigger. Make me a martyr. See how well that works out for you when every crew in the city comes looking for revenge." Castellano's hand wavered. The gun shook, and Elena saw her opening. She grabbed the nearest chip tray and hurled it at Castellano's head. It caught him in the temple with a crack that echoed through the sudden silence. He staggered, the gun dipping, and Adrian moved. He caught Castellano's wrist, twisted hard, and the gun clattered to the floor. A punch to the solar plexus dropped Castellano to his knees, gasping. Security finally reached them, hauling Castellano upright, securing his arms. Adrian picked up the gun and ejected the magazine, clearing the chamber. "Get him out of here, and call the district attorney. I think he'll be very interested in hearing about drug trafficking, fraud, and attempted murder." The security team dragged Castellano away, still cursing, still threatening. But the threats rang hollow now. He'd lost everything in a single night. His operation exposed, his credibility destroyed, his freedom about to vanish. Adrian turned to Elena, who was still standing behind the dealer's chair, breathing hard. "You threw a chip tray at him," he said. "It worked, didn't it?" "It was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. I learned from the best." Adrian's mouth twitched into something almost like a real smile. Then he looked around at the chaos, security guards, frightened spectators, tournament officials trying to restore order, and made a decision. "We're leaving," he said. They walked out together through the casino, past the gawking crowds and the flashing cameras. Elena felt like she was moving through a dream. Everything had happened so fast. The confrontation, the game, the gun. It was over. They made it to Adrian's car before Elena's legs gave out. She leaned against the hood, gulping air, trying to process everything. "You okay?" Adrian asked. "No, yes, I don't know." She looked at him. "Is it really over? The immediate threat?" "Yes. Castellano will spend the rest of his life in prison. His network is compromised. My people are already moving to secure what's left. And the debt? My father's fraud. Gone. Every dollar erased. Every record deleted. You're free. Free." The word should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt strange, foreign. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That depends on you." "On me?" "Your 30 days are up. Actually, they were up 3 days ago, but we've been slightly busy." He pulled the ace of spades from his pocket, the same card he'd written his promise on that first night, and held it out. "Contract's fulfilled. You can walk away. New identity, clean start, anywhere you want to go. I'll make sure you have everything you need." Elena took the card, staring at the faded ink. The promise that had kept her alive for the past month. The deal that had changed everything. "And if I don't want to walk away?" she asked quietly. Adrian's expression shifted. "Why wouldn't you?" "Because I'm tired of running. Tired of being someone's victim, someone's pawn, someone's mistake." She looked up at him. "You said I wasn't a piece on the board. So what am I?" "I don't know. What do you want to be?" Elena thought about it. About the girl who'd been dragged into a poker room and used as collateral. About the woman who'd exposed conspiracies, survived explosions, and thrown a chip tray at a man with a gun. "I want to be someone who chooses," she said, "not someone things happen to, someone who makes things happen." "That's a dangerous ambition." "I know, but I think I'm done playing it safe." Adrian studied her, and she could see him weighing the options, calculating the risks. Then he said, "I have a position that needs filling. My accountant left rather suddenly, and I need someone I can trust, someone who can spot patterns, find problems, think 3 steps ahead." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a choice. Take it or don't. But if you do take it, understand what you're signing up for. This world doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't give second chances. And once you're in, getting out is nearly impossible." "Sounds familiar," Elena said. "Except this time I'd be walking in with my eyes open." "You would." She looked at the card in her hand, at the promise that had been kept, the deal that had been honored. Then she looked at Adrian, this man who'd protected her when he didn't have to, trusted her when he shouldn't have, and given her a choice when most people wouldn't have. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If we do this, we do it as equals. Partners, not boss and employee." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "That's asking for a lot of trust." "I know. Do you trust me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he extended his hand. "I'll trust you if you trust me." Elena shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and for the first time in a month, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. "Deal," she said. 3 months later, Elena stood in the office that used to belong to Vincent Torres, reviewing financial statements that didn't make sense. She'd spent the morning untangling a network of shell companies that led back to 3 separate organizations trying to infiltrate Adrian's operations. She was good at this. Turned out, a lifetime of watching her father run cons had taught her exactly how to spot them. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. Conference room. 5 minutes. Bring the Castellano files. She gathered the documents and headed down the hall. The warehouse headquarters had been rebuilt, modernized, transformed into something that actually looked like a legitimate business. Most of the employees who worked here had no idea what Adrian really did. They thought they worked for a logistics company. In a way, they did. The conference room held 6 people she'd come to know over the past months. Adrian sat at the head of the table, and when Elena entered, he gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Miss Cruz has been tracking the remnants of Castellano's network," he said without preamble. "What did you find?" Elena pulled up a presentation on the screen. 3 splinter groups, all trying to claim territory. 2 of them are disorganized, easy to contain. The third is smarter. They've been quiet, building infrastructure, waiting for an opening. "Where?" "The port. Same routes Castellano used, but they've adapted the system. New contacts, new security, new distribution points." She highlighted a section of the map. "They're going to make a move within the next 2 weeks. We can either wait for them to commit and catch them in the act, or we can shut them down now." Adrian looked at her. "Your recommendation? Shut them down. Don't give them time to root in deeper." He nodded. "Agreed. Marcus, coordinate with port security. I want eyes on every shipment. Elena, work with the financial team to trace their money. Cut off funding, the operation collapses." The meeting continued for another hour, plans forming, assignments delegated. Elena contributed ideas, pushed back on strategies that felt risky, and generally held her own against people who'd been doing this for years. When everyone filed out, Adrian lingered. "You're getting good at this," he said. "I had a good teacher. I didn't teach you to argue with me in front of my crew. No, you taught me to think for myself. Can't have it both ways." He smiled, a real smile this time, not the cold mask he showed the world. "Fair point." They left together, walking to the parking garage. It was raining, the kind of soft drizzle that turned the city into something out of a noir film. Elena tilted her face up, letting the water cool her skin. "You ever think about leaving?" Adrian asked suddenly. "The city?" "All of it. The work, the danger, the constant looking over your shoulder." Elena considered it. 3 months ago, she would have said yes in a heartbeat. Now? Sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what the alternative is. Going back to being invisible, being someone things happen to instead of someone who makes things happen. It's not too late. The offer still stands. Clean break, fresh start, anywhere you want. "I know." She looked at him. "Is this your way of telling me I should go?" "No, this is my way of making sure you're staying for the right reasons." "And what are the right reasons?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you want to. Not because you feel obligated. Not because you think you owe me something, but because this is the life you actually want." Elena thought about the past 3 months. The work had been hard, sometimes terrifying, occasionally soul-crushing. She'd seen things she couldn't unsee, learned things she couldn't unlearn, but she'd also felt more alive than she ever had waiting tables or dodging her father's creditors. "I'm staying," she said, "not because I have to, because I choose to." "Even knowing what it costs?" "Especially knowing what it costs." They reached her car, something Adrian had insisted on buying her after the 3rd time someone tried to follow her home. She unlocked it, then paused. "Adrian, that first night, the poker game, if I hadn't called out the cheating, what would you have done?" He leaned against the car, rain darkening his shoulders. "Honestly, I don't know. I might have won the debt and spent the next month trying to figure out what to do with you. Or I might have walked away and let someone else take the responsibility." "Why didn't you?" "Because you made it impossible to ignore." He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. "You stood in that room, terrified and furious, and called out a conspiracy no one else saw. You could have stayed quiet, could have let it play out. But you didn't. I was just trying to survive. No, you were trying to win. There's a difference. He straightened. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Elena watched him walk to his own car, a sleek black thing that probably cost more than most people's houses. Before he got in, he looked back. Elena? Yeah? Thank you. For staying. Then he was gone, taillights disappearing into the rainy night. Elena sat in her car for a long time, engine running, heater fighting the chill. She thought about her father, wherever he was now, living with the consequences of his choices. She thought about Castellano, rotting in a federal prison. She thought about the girl she'd been a few months ago and the woman she was becoming. It wasn't a perfect life. It wasn't even a particularly safe one, but it was hers. And for the first time in her 26 years, that was enough. 6 months after the tournament, Elena walked into the same poker room where everything had started. It looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening, just another room beneath a casino. But the memories were still there, burned into the walls like smoke. Adrian was already waiting, sitting at the same table, in the same chair. You're early, she said. So are you. Elena sat across from him, in the seat her father had occupied that night. On the table between them was a single item, a contract, printed on heavy stock paper, official and binding. You sure about this? Adrian asked. Elena picked up the contract and read through it one more time. Partnership agreement, equal shares, equal say. Everything she'd asked for, laid out in black and white. I'm sure. Once you sign this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to everything I've built, everything I've done. If it falls, you fall with it. I know. And you're okay with that? Elena thought about the question. Was she okay with tying her fate to a criminal empire? With becoming part of a world that operated outside the law? With choosing this life, knowing what it meant? She thought about the alternative, a quiet life somewhere far away, safe and anonymous and utterly forgettable. Yeah, she said, I'm okay with that. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, the pen scratching across paper with a finality that felt like a door closing and a window opening all at once. Adrian signed below her, his signature a sharp slash of ink. Then he pushed the contract aside and pulled out a deck of cards. One more game? He asked. What are the stakes? Nothing, just playing, Elena smiled. Deal me in. They played for an hour. No money on the table, no ulterior motives. Just two people who'd survived hell together, sharing a game in the place where it all began. When they finally left, Elena paused at the door and looked back at the empty table. You know what the worst part was? She said. That first night. It wasn't the fear or the humiliation. It was feeling like I didn't have a choice, like my whole life was just a series of things other people decided for me. And now I make my own choices, even the bad ones. Adrian held the door for her. That's all anyone can ask for. They walked out together into a city that gleamed with promise and danger in equal measure. Somewhere behind them, in that underground room, a story had ended, but out here, under open sky, another one was just beginning. The city whispered its version of events, that a mafia boss had won a woman in a poker game, that she'd become his partner, his equal, his match. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any whispered story. Elena Cruz had never been won. She'd been bet, been used, been manipulated, but never won, because you can't win what refuses to be a prize. The night her father tried to lose her, she'd become something far more dangerous than anyone expected. Not a victim waiting to be saved, not a debt to be collected, but a force in her own right, choosing her battles and her allies with clear eyes and steady hands. And the man who stood beside her now? He wasn't someone who'd claimed her. He was someone she'd chosen, someone who'd proven himself worthy of that choice every day since. They got into her car. She always drove now, one more small act of control, and Elena pulled out into traffic, navigating the city streets with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Adrian watched her, something almost like contentment in his expression. No regrets? He asked. Elena thought about it, about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained, about the price she'd paid and the person she'd become. None, she said. And as the city lights blurred past the windows, Elena Cruz smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd survived, but the smile of someone who'd conquered. The game had never been about winning or losing. It had always been about refusing to be played. And Elena Cruz didn't get played anymore. She played.